Yeah, it's our time to shine. Show that's the kind of state of mind you gotta combine with hard work and time. You gotta climb to the top. Don't let yourself drop till your heart stops. Let this beat rock. Got a new clock and a new stock for this new rock. Just let your mind loose from the new stock. Drunk off the goose, thinking that I'm too pop. Getting caught with a few thoughts cause I'm too lost. Off the speakers can't even handle me. Give it what I got, nobody's gonna drain my energy. And I will never stop, I'm motivated by enemies. Setting up shop so everybody remember me. And no, I am not going through life regretfully. I'd rather work non-stop, what they call incessantly, than work some hard job just to live life pleasantly. Already got lost in my mind, not a fantasy, I'm getting with a forgotten soul. So stop, drop, and roll. You lost all control and pop off your balls. I got squat, I fold, I'm not bought, I'm sold. My stock rocks, it's gold. Hey, knock, knock, she home and shit, talk to close. I ain't stopping though, it's hip-hop, you know. Or is it rock and roll? I'm not dropping down, no, my pocket's grown. You can't stop the show, so get rockin' on. So let me break it all down for you. I ain't never giving up, I ain't never giving up. Taking that crown from you. I ain't worried about you, I ain't never. So let me break it all down for you. I ain't never giving up, I ain't never giving up. Taking that crown from you. I ain't worried about you, I ain't here to make friends. Yeah. I ain't never slowing down, keep on going till I'm down. No, I'm never slowing down, cause we're blowing up now. I ain't never slowing down, keep on going till I'm down. No, I'm never slowing down, cause we're blowing up. Hard points like a weapon, attack with no questions. In my own section and they still disconnected, cause their mind's been infected and they're filled with objection. Too filled for recollection, so we're losing all attention. They don't know I'm in contention, cause I'm gaining their attention. Cause I'm making a connection, lyricism and aggression got me feeling my ascension. In my passion, my profession, I'm attacking my obsession. Taking action and progressing, I go off on the enemy, that's what makes them scared of me. Make my plans carefully, then execute them daringly. They say I act recklessly, but that's why I'm effective. See, you can't predict my tendencies, I offer no transparency. Some people think I'm lost, others think I'll be a legend. I'm never gonna stop till I'm one above second. And my thoughts at the top, but my mind stay present. Don't let your dreams stop, cause dreaming is a blessing. They tell me all the same, told me I won't make a name. But it's not about the fame, it's about keeping me sane. So I stay within my lane, feel my blood pump through my veins. Feel adrenaline, no pain, welcome all to my domain. So let me break it all down for you. I ain't never giving up, I ain't never giving up. Taking that crown from you. I ain't worried about you, I ain't never. So let me break it all down for you. I ain't never giving up, I ain't never giving up. Taking that crown from you. I ain't worried about you, I ain't never. So let me break it all down for you. I ain't never giving up, I ain't never giving up. Taking that crown from you. I ain't worried about you, I ain't never. So let me break it all down for you.
Hey, beautiful people, and welcome to Aussie True Crime. If you're new here, I like to cover mainly Australian true crime cases. So I hope you stick around and listen to a few of my stories. And if you'd like to support the channel, the membership link is always pinned at the top. So we have Kaz. How are you, my darling? Spirit Time, how are you? Today I'm talking about a case. It's from Australia, but this one comes with a lot of trigger warnings. It's one I've wanted to cover for a while, but because of the case, I've been in two minds, but I do want to present it. I just can't say enough that this is very much a trigger warning. If this does affect you in any way, I don't mind if you leave and come back and watch another one. For the mods, when people come in, if you could just keep dropping the trigger warning as well, because this one is it. So I've made a presentation. What I'm going to do is just be going from two screens at the start, and then I'll play it through so that you can see the end of it, because there's so many characters and we jump in between them all so much in this case that I think it's easier if we just had one where we have the four people involved, who I have at the front here, and the second one being all of the victims. And then at the end, I've got like a little one that we can play through. So I'll just start it so that it can get to the main screens that I want. As I said again, this one comes with trigger warnings. It was a pretty horrific case all the way through. And yeah. So this crime shocked, well, I'd say all of Australia, but it definitely did touch parts of the nation as well. And to get it right, we have to actually go back to the 1950s. As part of a bold government project to attract unskilled and semi-skilled migrants from Britain. Hang on, I just want to watch so I don't go too far. Okay, I'm going to pause it here because these are the ones that were involved. So, as I said, in the 1950s, as part of a bold government project to attract the unskilled and the semi-skilled migrants from Britain, the government created satellite towns outside of Adelaide, CBD, in South Australia. They even named one of the suburbs after the Queen. What's it? Elizabeth. Some of us in New South Wales would know it. Even the streets were named after the Queen and her relatives and her castles. Hey, Jay, how are you? I sent you the link if you do want to come up. I know you said you want to come up on this one. So it was an environment that, do you know what I mean, when the Depression started hitting the northern suburbs, Elizabeth and Salisbury were the two of the towns that all these guys hung out in, I suppose. They bred people that, I wouldn't say bred, but like people lived there that were of under money. Do you know what I mean? A lot of people were on Centrelink at the time. And it did, obviously, all these people that we're talking about today came from these kind of areas. I don't want to say too much because I know there's probably really nice people living in these towns now, but you've just got to think back when do you know what I mean? People didn't have jobs. A lot of people on saying that's where we are, and that's the environment we're talking about. So these people, they hurt people. They knew not for millions of dollars, not even thousands of dollars, but in order to deal their social security payments and their benefits, and for the sheer joy of what they were doing. South Australian police had been investigating several missing persons cases since 1994, but starting with the discovery of skeleton remains in a paddock at Lower Light, so it's not far from Adelaide. Due to a series of forensic errors, the victim was not identified, and for several more years, despite the posting of $100,000 rewards, they couldn't find who the remains were. When the remains were identified, they were identified as Clinton Drizzell. I hope I'm saying his name right. Clinton was an open homosexual at 22 years of age. He was from the suburb of Elizabeth. Investigating it, the detectives quickly linked his disappearance to that of another unknown associate, 42-year-old neighbour Barry Lane, who was also reported missing in November 1997. So Barry was also a known pedophile and formed a relationship with another troubled teenager, Robert Wagner, who's up on the front here, during the 1980s, and he had moved with him into a house into Salisbury. And this is what, it was quite amazing when I was doing all my research for this. I thought Snowtown, everything happened in Snowtown, and quite a lot of it didn't happen. In Snowtown, it was just where these bodies ended up. It was actually more Salisbury, Elizabeth, and even Murray Bridge, if you're the area. So now we've got Robert with this Barry Lane, and he'd moved into a house in Salisbury. Barry knew Clinton and had introduced him to Robert Wagner and a neighbour who was John Bunting. So as you can see, both of them are up here. They were the main two of Snowtown. So Robert Wagner later broke off his relationship with Barry, and after Barry disappeared, a woman that he was living with told police that Barry had confessed to helping Robert and John dispose of a body in Clinton, north of the city. So that was the body from the start that they couldn't identify. A lot of the cars, yeah. That's the area. That's what I mean. A lot of... But, Jimmy, I'm not saying that's what lives there now. I'm sure there's nice people that live in these suburbs, and I don't want to put everyone down. But, yeah, that's the kind of area we're talking. So a very troubled 18-year-old who lived with Barry and this other woman, Thomas Trevine. Sorry, I'm saying their last names wrong. But Thomas had also recently committed his own passing. Before he passed, Thomas told another relative that he had helped two men with the passing of Barry Lane, who had been molested at the time, and dumped his body into a large drum. I'm going to go to the next one because these are the four people. The next one shows our victims, and I want to bring that up because we are jumping between them. As you can see up the top, the third one is Barry. The fourth one along is Clinton. So they're the two. Clinton was the first one found. Barry was the one that was going out with Robert at the start. Thomas, I think he's not even on here. Okay, he is at the bottom, but we don't have a photo of Thomas. Hi, Crystal. How are you? Hi, MacJoy. So, as I said, Thomas had recently committed his own passing, but before passing, he had told a relative that he had helped, with the death of Barry Lane, who was molested and dumped into a large drum. Thomas also revealed something else. Thomas told his cousin that Barry Lane had been tortured to reveal his social security and his PIN number to his bank, and also his bank details before they took his life. So Thomas was later found, and he was hanging in a tree in a paddock in November of that year. Police later learned that Robert Wagner had tied Thomas up and made it look like, a suicide, that he'd taken his own life, because he'd taken part in Barry's passing, and Thomas basically knew too much, so they took him as well. And that's a thing you'll find a lot as I go through it. If you know too much, that was a dangerous thing to the four men. So when police checked Barry's bank details, they discovered that withdrawals had recently been made from his bank account and from an ATM at Elizabeth, what again is a suburb, Elizabeth. Surveillance cameras showed that 27-year-old Robert Wagner using Barry Lane's card in July in 1998. Now, I know we all probably think Big Brother's always watching and the fact of these cameras being around, but you've got to also think back in 98, it was not a big thing at the time. Not a lot of us thought about surveillance cameras and stuff like that, but that's where a lot of the police got the evidence for this case, sadly. So the following week, police followed Robert Wagner to Murray Bridge, what is 1 hour east of Adelaide. And they followed him to the town of John Bunting, now shared with his de facto wife, Elizabeth Harvey, and her sons. So the lack of resources saw the surveillance operation grind to a halt, but police were able to link Robert Wagner and John Bunting to the disappearance of the two people that was already found. Now, Suzanne Allen, who is, she's not on, and her former partner, Ray Davis, I think he is on here. Yeah, he's at the top, the second one from the end. They lived in Salisbury, and now we're in 1996, so we're going back 2 years. 3 years before Suzanne Allen had ended up in a relationship with Ray Davis, who was intellectually handicapped, 19-year-old, like 19 years her junior, because she suspected him of molestation as well. Ray Davis disappeared, and in 1995 and December 1996, Suzanne went missing as well. Now, as I said, these all came up as missing people before they found out that they were victims of Snowtown. But they went missing from their Salisbury home, and shortly before Christmas, neighbours noted that two men were loading Suzanne's furniture into a van, and they called the police. When the police arrived, the police questioned the two men, being John Bunting and Robert Wagner, who said that Suzanne had moved houses after a family dispute and had sold them all of her furniture. So John Bunting had a key to the house and everything seemed in order, but the police later discovered that Suzanne's pension had been diverted to a Murray Bridge address, the same home that Robert shared with his de facto Elizabeth. So towards the end of 1998, police decided to take a closer look into the lives of John Bunting and Robert Wagner. Just going to go back a little bit so we've got here. And as I said, this is why I just want to show these two screens to start with, because we are going to be jumping from the four that did it to the victims. So John Bunting was born in Brisbane in 1966. He was an only child, and people basically, when he was a child, said that he was a psychopath. He was molested with as a child, and he didn't like pedophiles or homosexuals and could not differ between the two. Do you know what I mean? He put them all into one bag and basically just judged on whatever sexuality they were. As a teenager, he developed a fascination for digging tunnels, committing petty theft, small theft, and he used to cause pain to insects and small animals, especially by putting them in chemicals to watch them lose their lives. Again, as I said, trigger warnings, this whole story. He arrived in Adelaide in the mid-1980s, and John was briefly married to someone who was intellectually handicapped and partially blind as well. And her name at that time was Veronica Tripp. So during the next decade, he continued to desensitize himself by working in abattoirs and taking the lives of the animals there for fun. A childhood accident resulted in John also having no sense of smell, and this was a disability, proved no real handicap, but what he ultimately did, he couldn't smell. So when things go worse in the story, it's thinking that, like, you've just got to remember, John had no smell sense of it. John later befriended Robert Wagner at a welding course and took an immense dislike to Robert's partner at the time, who was Barry. So, however, used Barry to get information on others known to be like him, like their sexuality, and the ones that lived in the northern suburbs. And he kept a chart on his wall detailing these addresses and phone numbers of these people, and what their traits were as well. He used to record it all. And John linked all the names with some wool, and he called it his chart, like his chart that was on the wall, he called his spider wall. So one of the names on the wall was Clint Giselle, who was the neighbour of Barry. Became John and Robert's first victim in 1992. Clinton, till he passed away in his Salisbury home in 1992, and for no other reason than his sexual choices was the reason they took his life. But John and Robert conscripted then together to do the same to Barry Lane because he helped dispose of the body. And as I said, if you knew too much, you became one of their victims as well. So in 1995, Ray Davis was chosen as their next victim. John made Robert and Ray pass in his Salisbury home because, as again I said, Ray knew too much. And he was, at the time, he was with this Suzanne Allens. John and Robert strangled Ray with battery jumper leads while his de facto wife at the time, so I think it's John's, with Elizabeth Harvey, got Ray with a tilting tool and buried him in the backyard. And they buried him in a tunnel and that he dug underneath a concrete slab. So the following year, John ended the sexual relationship that he was having with Suzanne, but became annoyed with her advances and her constant questioning about what happened to Ray's whereabouts. So police later suspected that John and Robert also took Suzanne's life, but John told Elizabeth Harvey that Elizabeth Allen had passed away from natural causes. And even at the end, that's still questionable. We don't know whether she did or whether she became another one of their victims. So Suzanne's body was dismembered and buried in the backyard of her Salisbury home alongside where they had got rid of Ray's body as well. Her social security details were also directed or redirected to Murray Bridge. But again, because of the lack of resources, investigations were stalled on the whole case again. So in 1997, John Bunting was with Elizabeth Harvey and had moved to Murray Bridge where, the deaths continued. Now, Christine York was another person who came into it. She again was of low intelligence, addicted to poker machines, and she'd been in several other relationships before meeting John. In 1970, she'd given birth to her eldest son, who was Troy, before marrying John and having 3 more sons. So as a child, James Vlassakis, who is one of the trios that joined them, he was the oldest of the 3 brothers, and he was interfered with by his father and by his half-brother Troy as well. So by 14 years old, James saw John as both a hero and a father figure, but was later, coerced into their inner circle and into the gang. John undoubtedly used fear to control these people and some of the people in his life, but Robert Wagner, who was law and powerful enough to overpower the victims, was more a willing accomplice as well to what was going on. Rob led a troubled life and he turned back onto a homosexual past and entered into another relationship with another person. I couldn't find who it was, but he went back into it. And in 1997, Michael Gardner, who was a 19-year-old friend of a woman that had disappeared from them in Murray Bridge, where he was tortured and strangled and became the first victim to be placed into large industrial barrels with screw-top lids. So, up until now, they'd just been getting rid of the bodies wherever they could. But with Michael Gardner, he was the first one to actually be put into one of these industrial barrels. Hi, Lenny. How are you doing? Over the next 12 months, a number of victims were ultimately stored in 5 barrels, and they had the Murray Bridge home where John and Elizabeth were living. Barry Lane, whose life was taken back in October 97's body, was then placed, they took it out of where, like under the cement, and they'd also put him into one of these barrels. 29-year-old Gavin Porter, who is another one. I'll go back to let it go back to where we've got the victims. So here are the ones. So we're up to Gavin Porter. I can't see where he is. Oh, he's the second one from the bottom. So Gavin, he was a recovering drug addict as well, and he was living with James at Murray Bridge. His only crime, again, was that he annoyed John. So one night when James took his younger brothers to a movie, John and Robert took Gavin's life, and they showed James their handiwork upon his return from the movies. So Troy, now 21, returned to live with his mother, Elizabeth. He was the next one to lose his life. John disliked Troy and used his alleged history with James, because as I said, he had been with James, as his reason for taking his life. So as you can see, they didn't have to have a reason. These people were just taking it. You might have known too much. You might have been your sexuality, or even just down to the fact that you annoyed them. James was tortured in a bathtub and made apologies to James, who also took part in some of these games, and he was then forced to repeat comments into a tape recorder so that they could be replayed later on. The barrel they picked out for Troy was smaller than the other ones that they'd been using. So because he didn't actually fit in it, they had to cut his feet off and had to get him into the barrel. So now they were starting to dismember the bodies. The renewed police investigation again into the disappearance back of Suzanne, Allen and Ray forced them to move the three bodies that were at that house, and they placed them all in barrels now, and they were now in Adelaide in a home of Mark Hayden's. So Mark Hayden then came into the little clique. Mark had known John for over a decade, but had drifted away from John's inner circle when he and Robert had started taking people's lives. But Mark was married to a 37-year-old Elizabeth Hayden, and it's a name that comes up a lot in this case. And he was drawn back into the fold of these men and what they were doing. So Elizabeth Hayden had lived she was another one with low intelligence, and she had custody of two youngest children of 7, 5 different men, and had just started to turn her life around when her husband fell back in with Robert and John. So Elizabeth's sister Gail lived in the rumpus room of their house at the back of the house with her teenager son, Fred. John formed a sexual relationship with Gail and grew to despise Elizabeth. And now that the bodies were being stored at their home, John decided that they knew too much as well. So there'd be more victims. However, before Elizabeth Hayden would lose her life, Fred Brooks, who was the son, or Gail's 18-year-old son, he was mentally not all with it as well. And he didn't approve of his mother's relationship. So in September 1998, Fred brought to a Murray Bridge house and taken. So it was the vacant house that John and Elizabeth Harvey used to live in, and her sons. And they'd moved several doors down Like, they were still in Murray Bridge, but they were several houses down. So they took Fred there. Fred was overpowered again, handcuffed. They made him reveal his pension numbers and details, and they made him recite certain comments as well into the tape recorder. They again, trigger warning, they tortured and strangled him. His body was transported back to the Hayden's garage where the other bodies were, and also stored into a barrel. Gail was later played Fred's tape comments over the phone to convince her that he'd gone to Perth to live with live with another girlfriend. So this is how they kind of covered it up. Do you know what I mean? They made them tape certain comments into the tape recorder so they could play it back to people later on to explain where they had gone. And they were also taking their social security and their bank details so that they could then cash in. And after these people had passed, they were still collecting their social security benefits. And that's, again, where I really emphasized you've got to remember where this was and the time that people didn't have a lot of money. So, do you know what I mean? It might have only been $400 or $500 a fortnight, but that $400 or $500 a fortnight, when you've taken 2, 3, 4 lives, is all starting to add up, because they had reasons. Do you know what I mean? They didn't. Their payments didn't stop unless, of course, Centrelink done a check, and I don't think a lot of them did back then. So you can start to see their pattern. Do you know what I mean? They're taking them for next to no reason, taking pensions, and then because they're making them do these tape recordings, do you know what I mean? They're getting away and telling loved ones of the pool where they go. So Gary O'Doyle, he was 29, and he was an accomplice to James Vlassakis, who was in Murray Bridge, but not really known to John. He reminded him too much of Troy, which was enough in John's mind to take Gary's life. Gary was awarded the state, and he had a brain injury from a pedestrian accident in 1994. James convinced Gary that he had some friends that were coming over to Gary's flat for a drink. Gary was a small man. He was no match for Robert Wagner. Gary was handcuffed, tortured, beaten in the bathtub of his home, and he was also forced to reveal his pension details and reward measures as well for his family. Gary was later transported back to Adelaide and placed in another barrel with the other 4 victims. Gary's flat was looted, and John Bunting and James Vlassakis were taking everything out when curious neighbours were told that the owner had moved to Sydney and sold his furniture to them, and John had the keys to Gary's home. So again, police were called, but because he had the keys, they just assumed that all was good, and do you mean that was it? In November 1998, Mark Hayden took his sister-in-law Gail on a drive in his 4-wheel drive, while Elizabeth Hayden's children were staying with the brother. Elizabeth was alone, and John and Robert arrived at her home. Robert handcuffed Elizabeth, placed her in the bathtub. Need I say more? John then made Elizabeth repeat the statements into the tape recorder, to the effect that she was leaving her husband for another man. The pair then strangled her. Do you mean, again, cut her body and everything and put her in another barrel. Stored her in the garage. Later that night, Hayden had phoned John to return home. Hayden had explained that his sister-in-law that all hell had broke loose at the house. The cover story they made up was told that Elizabeth had made a pass at John and then had locked herself into the room when he rejected her advances. She then phoned a boyfriend to come and take her away. So again, she goes missing. I mean, not a lot of people were asking questions. John Bunting clearly thought that he was smarter than the police by this time, but the disappearance of Elizabeth Hayden led police back to him and finally led the police to what was going on in Snowtown. Elizabeth Hayden was reported missing by her brother, although her husband Mark seemed, he didn't care when the police called on him. Mark said that his wife had ran off with another man because that's what he'd been told in the calls, but police asked him to write a statement to that effect. He wrote that two friends, John Bunting and Robert Wagner, were at the home when Elizabeth left. And that's the sad thing. People were believing their story as well. So when police began to investigate the disappearance of Elizabeth Hayden, the barrels were transported by vehicle to an address in Hayton that was rented by John Bunting, and then to another address in Snowtown. So, basically as the police were getting in closer, they just kept moving these barrels around. And you got to remember again, John couldn't smell, so he couldn't smell. That was the smell that was coming out of these barrels that they just kept moving around. And they're now in Snowtown. Mark Hayden also moved out of the house after police called him. A neighbor later told the police that she'd seen some men loading some barrels into the Toyota Land Cruiser because, remember, they were in his garage. The smell from the barrels caused John Bunting, Robert Wagner, and Mark to rent a vacant bank that was in Snowtown at the time. It wasn't, it used to be a bank, but at the time it was just a vacant bank. It wasn't being used. So they rented it out and they stored the barrels to avoid detection, hoping that in the vault would take the smell. By this time, the police surveillance had been deactivated again, and the men's utility had been tracked making regular trips to Snowtown as they took all the barrels over. Even as the police closed in on Robert and Mark, they thought that they were safe enough that they lured David Johnson to Snowtown so that he'd be their 12th and final victim. So on May 9th, 1999, what was Mother's Day, James Vlassakis drove with his stepbrother to Snowtown on the pretext that they were buying a computer. Waiting at Snowtown was John Bunting and Robert Wagner, who overpowered him, tortured him again in order to reveal his bank details and his social security. John Bunting then forced David to repeat the sentences into the voice recording software that was installed in the computer, and then they took his life as well. While Robert Wagner and John Vlassakis went into town to use David's credit cards, David had fought for his life and broke several of John Bunting's ribs. Robert Wagner was angry, though, with John because when it came to trigger warning, when it came to the strangling, that was actually his part, so he got upset that Robert done it. And Robert Wagner and James Vlassakis trigger warnings defleshed the body so that it would fit into the 6 barrel that was placed inside the bank vault. Again, as I said, they didn't care. They were just doing whatever they could to get them into these barrels, and they were storing them in the bank to try and keep the smell. Although the details was suppressed on this, during the trial, it later came out, and do you know what I mean? I'm trigger warnings that there was actually proof that Robert and John had also cooked up parts of David, and as a trophy ritual, you can guess what they'd done. So one day after David lost his life, the recordings of his voice made by John Bunting were pieced together and played over the phone to convince his relatives and a long-time girlfriend that David had just skipped town because he got a 13-year-old girl pregnant. Well, obviously it wasn't true, but it's the story that they came up with. On the 20th of May, 1999, police were tracing the Land Cruiser by this stage that they were using for the many trips that they were making from Murray Bridge to Snowtown. And at the previous visit, Robert Wagner had remarked about, he commented about the smell because, he didn't have a problem. It was John that couldn't smell. And a comment about the smell of the victims and that they would have to go back to the vault to retape the barrels back up and make sure that everything was sealed. Police allowed them to leave Snowtown. They were under surveillance during the whole night, and everything that they'd done was just more for the investigation. So as they made their trip back to the vault and everything they were doing, it was all being recorded by this stage. What they discovered, when they finally the police did go into the bank, it was enough to repulse even the hardest detectives, and they launched one of the biggest police investigations in the history of South Australia. On the day after the discovery of the 8 bodies in the bank building, John Bunting, Mark Hayden, Robert Wagner were all arrested and charged with 12 counts of murder in the Adelaide Magistrates Court. So I'm just going to go back. So we've got Mark, John, and Robert that was all charged with 12 counts. On the 2nd of June, James Vlassakis was also charged. Although he became the Crown's star witness, James was not provided with immunity from prosecution. So James pleaded guilty. I think it was 4 deaths, including that of his stepbrother Troy and David Johnson. James was jailed for a minimum of 26 years on the 21st of June 2001. Elizabeth, she had, at the start, taken part in some of them, but she'd actually passed from cancer in 2001 before she could even go to trial, or they could get her for her part back at the start. By this, details of the crimes, was around Australia. As I can only say, Australia was shocked by it, but it was also getting national headlines as well. The court heard that as the number of bodies increased, from 1 victim in 1992, 1 in 1995, 1 in 1996, you got 3 in 97, and 5 in 1998. And finally, David Johnson's body in 1999. It became more gruesome, and the facts were coming out of what did happen. There was evidence of the torture that was going on, the playing of the corpse. Some of the victims had electrodes placed in their private parts and were given electric shocks. Others had toes crushed by pliers, cigarette burns over the bodies. It's just, you can't say how horrible it was. If there was evidence of this once the police actually gone through everything. So the investigation into Snowtown ultimately took about 6 years, and was completed by a dedicated team of police officers, forensic science personnel, and the South Australian Department of Prosecution. 15 jurors were enlisted for the marathon trial because of the horrific nature of the evidence. Three of the jurors had asked to be excused from the trial. John Bunting offered no defence to his non-guilty plea. Robert Wagner tried to justify the case by saying that he was doing the community a service by getting rid of these people. Definitely, I mean, there's no way around it. You can't make an excuse for what these men were doing. So John Bunting and Robert Wagner were found guilty on 11 counts of murder on the 8th of September 2003. The jury could not determine, as I said, if Suzanne Allen had took her own life or whether she passed of natural causes. They didn't actually get charged for her. But even at 11 victims, the Snowtown murders are, one of the worst serial cases in Australia and in our criminal history. John Bunting and Robert Wagner were then jailed for life without the prospect of getting parole. Mark Hayden was tried separately and pleaded not guilty. Mark successfully defended the charge by being an accessory and by saying that he thought that the barrels were actually containing kangaroo carcasses. Well, it definitely wasn't. But while Mark Hayden said that he felt trapped by John Bunting's personality, he accepted his responsibility for what he'd done. So in 2005, he finally pleaded guilty to assisting John Bunting and Robert Wagner in the disposal of his wife Elizabeth and in Troy's. Mark was sentenced to 25 years in jail. He is eligible for parole as early as 2017. The South Australian Housing Commission later demolished the home where Suzanne Allen and Ray Davis had lived because they didn't want it to become a shrine of the case. And the fact that they chose the quiet country town of Snowtown to store the bodies was just an accident of geography. Do you know what I mean? It was just happened to be where the bank was, where they could get somewhere where they thought it was safe. But the town now experienced its steady stream of tourists who go through and look at the bank. Locals have discussed the possibility of renaming the town, but in the meantime, Snowtown carries the stigma of this crime. Do you mean the locals cop it all the time? It's not a place I would want to live, but you, as any true crime people, you can assume that, do you know what I mean? They all hear about it. The last I did hear of the bank was that the new owners of the bank were actually talking about making it a bed and breakfast because obviously that's where all the tourists go. And as we know with any big crime, do you know what I mean? There's always your steady crime people that are going to come through and want to look at the bank. It still is up. So I'm just going to go through some of the photos that I have. It's just a short little, like just a couple of photos. So this was basically where everyone fit in, whether they were neighbours, who was related to who in the victim part of it. As I said, people were losing their lives just because they knew too much or because of their sexuality, but I think is just wrong. This is the bank. Snowtown is still there today. As I said, they're now looking at making it into a bed and breakfast. There is plenty. So this was Clinton and Barry, two of the victims. These are the men themselves. These were three more. So that was Ray and Suzanne. And I can't remember the last one, but that's one of the victims again. Okay. I sent you the link. This is them. So the one on the end is Troy, whose life they took was one of the brothers. More of their victims. Barrels. So as you can see, they were screw-top barrels. They did have plastic in there at one stage as well to try and stop the smell from the barrels. This was in the bank when they actually went in after the investigation, where they were digging down to make sure there was no more. And it was all in the vault of the bank. Snowtown got a bad rep after bumper car stickers. Yeah. I was showing you at time last night, and it was probably not the nicest, but it was a bumper sticker that was saying, I can't even remember, but come to Snowtown, you'll have a barrel of a time or something. And because Spirit Time actually came from Murray Bridge, I'm not saying he was there when this all happened, but because he came from Murray Bridge and around that area, he said to me that it was quite on the joke of the towns, that they were putting them on bumper stickers and everything, like the history of it. This is one of the, when they found some of the barrels, this was one of the ones they had out in the bush. That's just the police out the front of the bank again. So yeah, that's about my story on Snowtown. As I said, it does come with a lot of trigger warnings. It is one of our biggest crimes, so I did want to cover it. Roll out the barrel's not a song. Well, as I said, it became the biggest joke in that area. If you talk to anyone about true crime in Australia, I mean, the bodies, it was also known as the bodies in the barrels, but yeah, Snowtown's definitely one we all know.
Hello.
Mac J, how are you, my darling?
I'm good. How are you?
Good now. You said you've been covering this case too.
I've been mostly researching it actually at the moment.
US has some awful stories, yeah.
Yeah.
They do. But that's the thing, that's why I want to cover Australian crimes, because we hear so much of, do you mean America's and US and all the cases over there, that people don't actually talk about Australian crime. And as gruesome as it is, we have some pretty bad cases that have happened here, and that's, do you mean, again, I wanted to start my channel and start talking about the Aussie crimes as well, because they don't get publicized enough and you hear enough about it, because we can't, oh, I've lost her. We can't, we don't get as much evidence as America does. So do you mean even to find these crimes until they're actually finished? Do you mean you don't hear a lot about what's going on? Especially Snowtown, it took over 6 years. As they said, for the investigations, they were falling off because they didn't have, do you mean finances weren't enough that they could keep going with them and that? But it's just, yeah, it's really sad. And to think, my biggest part is that these people were losing their lives simply because they knew too much, and because they had a pension that these men could take. And that's it's really sad. It wasn't for thousands of dollars.
Yeah, they just, yeah, I'm here. StreamYard just kicked me for some reason. I don't know. I couldn't hear you, so I had to re-enter the live. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Okay. Snowtown Bank becomes a bed and breakfast. Would you spend the night? I don't know. I'd be interested in the paranormal side. I'm sure Spirit Time would want to go for the paranormal side of it. But, I mean, the thing is, and I think when a lot of people think of Snowtown, they think that all the murders happened there. That's the thing. They didn't happen there. It was only the fact that the bodies, like the barrels, were stored in the bank. Most of the crimes happened in Salisbury, Elizabeth, and Murray Bridge. So it was, do you mean more in their houses, in the bathtubs? Was that? So, yeah, I don't know. I'm sure Spirit Time would want to go. He likes those things.
Oh,
Did
you get a chance to read the book I recommended?
No, not yet. I've had so much going on lately.
It's got some interesting stuff on this case to show. A very detailed book. It even claims that there may have been other murders.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have read that, and when I was doing my research, there was quite a few people mentioned that they went missing, but the police don't know whether or not to tie them, and they didn't have enough evidence to tie certain missing cases. I suppose it would be like over 𝔬𝔢 too, though. Anyone that went missing in a particular time would be question marked on it. Do you know what I mean? They only ended up getting the ones that they could prove. Generally, mainly the ones that pensions were redirected. That was the biggest part, I think.
Yeah.
So, but there still would be question marks on a lot of people, I think, that was around the area. And as I said, you got that with even over 𝔬𝔢. There was people that were sitting around the Sydney area at the same time that still would be question marked because, do you know what I mean? He didn't give us all the people he took either before he passed away. These men are obviously still alive, but they're not giving up any more than what we already have on them.
Exactly. I wish they would.
Yeah. He is, Lenny. He would go anywhere or do anything as long as he knew there was paranormal there. He would take his. He has like a little box behind us in our room. It's a suitcase, and I have lost count of how many paranormal toys he has in there. Yep, no scare. He doesn't. Even our last one, when we went to what was it, Arrowdale Asylum, Spirit Time has a necklace that he's supposed to wear. I can't remember which angel it is, but it was a certain angel that he would be wearing, and he wears it every time we go. It's his protection. And I said to him, "Did you bring your necklace?" And he goes, "I brought it." And we got to the asylum, and I'm like, "Spirit Time, where is your necklace?" And he said, "You said I had to bring it. You didn't say I had to wear it." He'd actually left it back at our station, and I'm like, "Oh my God." It is. Actually, that's what it is, the Michael one. But yeah.
Did you, you know where Bunting grew up in 𝔬𝔢, right?
Yep.
Yep. I actually used to live near that like suburb, and it's all like, it's changed now, but it's still sort of upper class. Oh, I'd say middle class. Middle class 𝔬𝔪𝔐.
Yep.
So the house where his family house was, I've actually been there, like driven past. It gives off a weird vibe. Yeah, I'm not very good at this speaking on stream.
So I was just reading the comments. Spirit Time is dirty. Say, oh, you're leaving, Kaz? Okay, thank you so much for coming, modding.
See you, Kaz.
I sage everything, Lenny. Living with Spirit Time. Sage is my favorite thing. So how many died? So there was 12 people that they were charged with 11. The 12th person, they couldn't, what was Suzanne, they couldn't say whether she died of natural causes or whether they were part of it. I think they were part of it. But again, that's what I was saying about Jimmy just not having the proof to tie them. But they were charged with 11 counts. All up. No, Kaz is still. So, yeah. But I think that's... Is there anything you've researched that I missed, or...?
Just really how his early life was in Inala. He his parents were like, how do I say this? Sort of lower class. He was abused by his brother, or brother. Yeah. And then he collected all this creepy shit in his room. Spiders, just a standard serial killer stuff, really.
They say he started with animals, and he used to put them in chemicals as well.
Yes.
Right. And that's the thing. He sort of grew up like that. So, do you know what I mean? Not that I'm saying it's an excuse, but it's a product of what they were living in. That, do you know what I mean? They just grew up and thought that it was okay to do what they were doing.
Exactly.
Really. And Jim, the thing is what I was saying before, it wasn't for millions. It was like, what's a pension? I don't know. I'm not on a pension, but what's a pension? Like $500 a fortnight, I think.
Well,
roughly, probably not even that back then.
I believe now it's around a fortnight. You get around, depending on circumstances, 900.
Okay,
but
more than I thought.
Well, yeah, just a little bit more, but I don't know what it would have been back then. Probably closer to maybe 400, 300. I don't know.
Yeah. But then again, as I said, once you got 4 or 5 of them, it would have started adding up, and they were collecting their pensions for quite a while as well, because it went over 6 years, so they would have got a fair bit of pension, because that's how the police actually got a lot of them, was that they were redirecting their pensions back to marriage. So, but I think that's about it.
Well, did you know Bunting actually offers Wagner to teach him how to read and write? Did you manage to find that?
No,
that was an interesting tidbit.
Yeah, I think it was around 700 back then. Yeah, because we're going back 10 years ago. I mean, you're going back to the 1990s. As just said, it was about 700 back then. Well, Robert and John were definitely the closest of all of them. Do you mean the two just drifted in? So I would believe that. But I think that's it. I'm going to have to close and go because it's Sunday, so it's roast night for us, and I have to go and help Spirit Time finish cooking. Thank you for coming up, Joy, and thank you everybody for listening.
No worries. Sorry I came up late.
You're fine. You're fine. I'll be back tomorrow for our Christmas one, and hopefully next Sunday back for another true crime. So thank you everyone for coming.
Yep. Don't forget to hit the like button, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
There's too much that's going on, I don't know what to do. Paralyzed by options in this world, can't pick and choose. Yeah, everybody's life is on display, including you. Yeah, I feel every day is just the same, stuck in a loop. I need some variety, I'm sick of this anxiety. I'm sick of this society, they make us feel a rivalry. Compare ourselves to others, but we all got different mothers. We were raised in different structures, so we're different, it's no wonder, yeah. I just want a great life, something where I feel like I just didn't waste time. Something I look back and say that was a great time. Cause man, I just hate when the years pass by the wayside. I'm lost inside And I need a little time to find who I am in this life. I will find a way to feel alive. I'm so lost inside. You better watch out now, I figured something out, what this whole life's about, yeah. It's not the goal, it's the journey, wasted emotion is worry. I'll stop being in a hurry, and I'll just enjoy what I'm doing, keep pushing forward and moving, appreciate the improvement, yeah. I was so stuck on a goal, was losing sight of my soul. Need to enjoy getting old and be so present. I don't know if there's a heaven, but I know I wanna get in. And sometimes I feel a presence, energy in a direction, so I follow intuition. It took me to a musician, now I'm on a different mission, to help others with afflictions. Now I'm not lost inside, I finally have seemed to find who I am in this life, and I found a way to feel alive. I'm not